Welcome back, everybody. Jason Widdop here, episode 7 or 8, I think, of By Marketers for Marketers. Today, we've got a special episode for everybody. I've got Chris Walker, Brandee Sanders, Blake Cohlan, Alex Mann, all from different areas of marketing. But we're here today to talk about ABM and versus demand generation. And to have that conversation, we're going to talk a little bit about how we define the two, what are some of the differences, and then we're just going to roll in and have a little bit of a discussion about well, why is it hard to define? We'll probably figure that out in a minute. What things you need to have in place before you really think about either one, really. And then, how do you decide when to move from demand generation to ABM or even vice versa? Are you ready for it? And then we'll end with ideally some tactical steps that you can take if you're kind of struggling with some of these things on, how you can get into it, how you should approach it, those kinds of things. So let's do little internal intros.
Yeah, I'll go first. Cough, cough. No, I'm just kidding. So I'm Brandee Sanders. I'm Vice President of Marketing, newly Vice President of Marketing with Motive Retail. Previously, actually with Blake at Blackline, also worked with Sun Music, Etsy, great work with Serious Decisions in G2. So lots of time in the B2b SaaS space and tons of ABM fun with demand base and the like. So super excited to talk about this because I love, especially the operations angle. I love talking about this stuff.
Awesome. Blake, why don't you go next?
Sure. Yeah. So Brandee and I worked together at Blackline. Seems like ages ago now, but I lead our growth marketing effort at SupportLogic. My background is in operations initially as a solution architect for Demand Gen International. That's where I got my start, a big name in the space. They coined the name before it was popular. And then, went to marketing operation roles, then went to demand gen roles, partner marketing roles. So now I lead the growth function at SupportLogic, very fast growing startup in the Valley here, Silicon Valley, and loving it. So, we're doing some ABM testing, trying to, get the right mix, as we'll talk about later. But
Sweet. Alex, you want to go?
Yeah, sure. My name's Alex. The only Alex on the call. I am the director. Yeah, I know. Usually, everyone in the late '80s has this name. I'm the director of marketing, director of growth at Capchase. Also, a very kind of young startup. I mean, the company is just over a year old. My first foray into B2b marketing. I previously was at Lambda School, which is a sort of an online. I mean, some of you may have heard of this place already, but and I ran the marketing there. It's an online school for coding and data science. And before that was at a credit card startup called Mission Lane, which is for subprime, non-predatory credit cards. I do want to specify that. Helping people rebuild their credit. And I come from a background of media agency, brand, and design background. So when I was asked to actually come onto this, I was quite curious because I think my take as somebody who is less experienced in account-based marketing, but I am very much into the fire with it. So I'm very curious about all of our takes here, and hopefully I have a lot to add.
Hey everyone, my name is Chris Walker. I've been in B2B marketing for about 10 years now. At the beginning of my career in large enterprise profitable hardware companies, and then moved into a recurring revenue model hardware venture funded company that was about Series D. And after that, I started this company called Refine Labs. And we work with currently 32 enterprise SaaS organizations on demand gen and ABM.
The first thing I want to do is I want us to try and define these two things. So for us to talk about the differences, we got to set the context, right? So, I'm actually, Chris, do you want to go first on this one, and then I'll piggyback on you because we'll probably be similar, but we'll probably have a couple different things, and then we can talk about that for a minute.
Where I'm at on the differences,
yeah, or how you define them. Yeah.
Sure. So I see ABM as a subset or a sub function of demand gen to start. Another thing about ABM is that I believe that it's been repackaged of what companies should have been doing anyway. So coordinated sales and marketing efforts at target accounts by defining your ICP where you have an unfair competitive advantage to win that are high value. So we were doing that. We were doing that as a company in 2015. We called it field marketing plus sales, And so the difference and distinction between the two is, I think that demand gen is way more over the top marketing, one to many, one to few, and ABM is way more hand-to-hand combat, one to one.
Nice. I'm going to take a little stab at it too, because I agree. Because I actually worked at one of the early B2B agencies. It's called Babcock and Jenkins. It was one of the first ones. They started in the 90s, actually, out of Portland. And so that's where I think I learned the term. We called it TAP program. It was a targeted account program, So, hey, here's our TAP program. It was the same exact thing, though. It's like the notion of we're selling to accounts, not people. We need to have an unfair advantage on the data that we have about these accounts, so that we can, go to them with personalized messaging or why you need us kind of thing. And so, but yeah, it's like something I think I did an episode a while ago with Lauren Goldstein. She's been in B2B marketing forever as well. And she was telling me that the term was coined by, I can't remember. It was like an IT sales, when it was like starting to get really complicated in the late 80s and early 90s, like these really complicated sales that nobody'd really done before. And they just started to realize I need to put 20% of my effort on the 80% of the things that are actually going to turn into fruit. And that's really kind of where it started. And so, I like to think about it as, it's an approach that focuses on identifying and marketing to a specific number of target accounts based on their likelihood to buy your product. That's kind of how I think about it. And then most ABM programs are trying to take a user on a journey through marketing from high level thought leadership, tofu content, all the way down to low level reasons to buy, kind of bofu content. And then it doesn't end at the acquisition. Then, ABM, proper ABM, I think, follows the account through adoption and renewal cycles into CS, sales, marketing, et cetera. And then when I think about demand gen, I think about well, if we're going to generate demand, let's define what demand means. And so I go to the dictionary, what does demand mean? And I got, let's see, I wrote it down. The desire of purchasers for a particular commodity. So I love that word, desire, right? So it's demand generation is about making your product or category desirable to potential customers, because that's how you're generating that demand. And so I like to think of it, I'm not really talking about the tactics in there, and I think of it the same way as Chris. I think of ABM as a subset, or as one of the things you can do to generate that demand. And it's all but under this larger umbrella of generating demand. So let's see, I'll pick on somebody. Brandee, what do you think about those definitions? Yeah, how do you differ on those?
For those of you who are new to ABM, I would say it's quantity and quality. So traditional demand gen was just pure volume. The net was super wide. You're looking at just literally a large quantity of leads, regardless of the quality, or like you both said, likelihood to convert and actually be retained over the long run. So when I think about it, I think about them almost like maybe siblings, right? They're in the same family. They share similar qualities, but each of them, they go on different ways. And that's really traditional demand gen was, literally give me hundreds and hundreds of leads. I want all the lead buckets so big that sales and SDRs and AEs and BDRs are drowning in leads. Even if it's literally never going to convert, it's not a good fit. They're nowhere near your industry or your vertical. And so I think it's really about, when we look at ABM and we're looking at it, we're talking about targeting specific. It's going to be a lower quantity, but a higher quality. And demand generation is the old fashioned way where we're looking at that single funnel view. Like you said, tofu to bofu, but really it's just about volume and outreach. And it tends to be tied to the more traditional channels. And there's also less, I'm trying to stay away from more interoperability and synergy and all those terrible words, but there's less alignment between sales and marketing in the traditional demand gen view, because marketing is just there to create a pile of stuff. And then sales has to go through, the true qualification measurement on that. So I think ABM is a different world where there has to be alignment before there's success. It's mandatory. And because of that, you tend to have healthier orgs because it's traditional chasms between the madmen and the quarterbacks, right?
So do you think of them as pretty separate things then, or do you see one as the umbrella
They're tied
of another?
to each other. They're a bit like twins. That's the way I think of them. It's maybe they're the twins from that spooky movie where they're at the end of the hallway. Because sometimes when I'm at the end of quarter, that's what it feels like. But They both have the ability to scare the hell out of you. But no, I think of them, they're siblings and they're connected to each other. And they both come up the same ladder that is going to be tied to things like actual revenue and core KPIs that are required for, like, is this an effective, what we're doing are you an effective arm of the marketing or the sales org? So they're both tied to that kind of like overwhelming strategy for the entire org. So I think that they're like a DNA helix is a great way to think of it. They're tied to each other. You really can't think about them being entirely separate from each other, in the sense that most orgs are not ready for that level of maturation yet. I've never actually met one. Maybe they're out there. They're magical, pure, absolutely unicorn ABM orgs. Half of the time, no. More than half the time, if we're being honest. You see traditional demand gen, and then once in a while they go, oh, a target list. And then that's called ABM, right? Which is actually, at its true its form, one target list does not ABM make. So I think it's a blend. I think it's the blend, but it's in the simplest way. If you have no idea what the hell ABM is, it's quality versus quantity. Traditional demand gen was number of leads, regardless of quality. At ABM these are strategically and targeted in tandem with sales with a higher likelihood of retention and conversion.
Cool. Blake, Alex, anything to add to any of it?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that, there's a lot of metaphors in that description, and it really does help contextually because I've got my own metaphor for it. I was going to say it's like an onion, in the sense that, like, I look at something like demand gen and I'm like, I feel like that's like your core, like, basic, where are you going to start? It's like, get your total addressable market of like all the different types of companies in your area that you want to go after, and then literally supply the type of content to demand gen, like generate that demand from ads or from whatever else. Get those leads. They could be anything. And then it's like refining that and into an account-based marketing sort of strategy. Because I mean, ultimately, like, one of you mentioned the 20%, 80%, like 20% of your best customers, and like really trying to personalize that kind of message. You can't take a demand gen strategy and go after like what you consider your high value like targets and go, yeah, we're going to give them a one for all message. Do you know what I mean? You just can't. And I think, like, somebody mentioned more accuracy. I think it was you, Brandee. I totally agree. And I mean, that's the difference between like ABM and demand gen. Is like the accuracy with the data, being able to use like a lot of your own first party data to really isolate those audiences within your sort of total demand gen mix, and then really try to, like, upsell them, up target them with better, more personalized messages.
And yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I see it as a subset as well. I think that you can't have one without the other. I think of demand gen as the foundation, and then you're able to expand upon it with ABM and get that personalization, go deep into what potentially someone might care about. So if you're aligning to a growth strategy like product-led marketing, right? Being able to speak in terms of those languages to highlight and identify where your product or solution can really help there, and be targeting, with the technographics and really speak the language of your future customers. I think we owe that as marketers to be able to do those things. And we have the data, we have the technology, we have the plays across sales and marketing. So we should be doing it.
Interesting. I mean, even amongst us chickens here, we've got different definitions, right? So like there's even some things that disagree a little bit, even how we talk about it, volume, quantity, and then, kind of Chris was talking about it like an umbrella, one's a subset of another. And so I think why do we think that ABM is a hard term to define? Like, why is ABM like, because this is not a new thing, right? This isn't like all of a sudden, this is the first time I've gotten on a call and like people don't necessarily agree on what ABM means. So why do we think that is? I mean, Chris, why is there not a common definition of ABM?
So I think there's two things going on. One is that I truly believe that the reason that demand gen has a bad rap and is purely because just companies weren't executing well. And so ABM is basically like what demand gen should have been doing anyway. That's the way that I see it. And then the second piece, I think, is because it's been so technology centric. And so technology and vendor centric, the strategy makes perfect sense. No one's going to argue with the fact that you should pick your high value accounts and you should prioritize them and you should invest more money to acquire them. The strategy makes sense. My belief is that 99% or more of ABM programs break down in execution because the advice that's given by technology vendors on how to execute the strategy is either non-existent or very biased to their tool.
Yeah.
And that's my
100%.
my belief about why it's not working.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it comes down to.
Go ahead, Blake. Go ahead, Blake.
It also comes down to different levels of experience within the org structure and your marketing career or your sales career, right? B2B marketing is not taught in school. We know this. I mean, we're piecing it together, and it's dependent on what you have in your tool set at the company you have, and then also what the ABM vendors potentially are saying, right, to be able to achieve this. We know that traditional marketing automation tools are lead centric. We know that they're not based on the account. On the sales side, they're used to working the accounts. This is their plays, right? And so that convergence, that different level experience creates that mismatch. And, you know, really to address it, you have to align. You have to define what these things are. And that's the first step.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too, because the way some of these define, so talking about the technology first definition of a process is difficult because little bit of inside baseball here. We just got invited to participate in, Gartner's Magic Quadrant, their first one for ABM platforms.
Congrats.
And I declined. I declined because of the way they define ABM technology. I said, well, one of their primary criteria, and they have probably 8, inclusion criteria. One of the primary criteria was native display targeting for B2B. So I got on the call with the analysts doing the Magic Quadrant, and I got into a fierce argument with them about this entire part. I'm like, I can't participate in a review when an analyst firm says that blanketing an entire account with display ads is an absolute inclusion criteria to be an ABM platform. I'm like, show me anything that says that works for B2B. And so we got, of course, they don't like to be challenged. And so we got into a little bit of argument, and I self-selected out, which is fine. It's not a big deal, but but that's the problem, and then when you actually look at Forrester's, because we did Forrester's last year and turned up last place out of last, like 13 out of 13 in the Forrester wave, because I didn't know that we couldn't participate. Was probably the first problem. But the definition of the way they define ABM, if you went to Demandbase's website and took their feature list from their website and matched it to Forrester's criteria, it's almost a 1-to-1. So then it's like, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Did the analyst say, well, this is what ABM is and this is what the technology should do? Or did the technologies come first and influence the analysts to say like, oh, well, these companies are doing well right now, so this must be what it's like?
It reminds me of that Silicon Valley episode where they were talking about trying to figure out what they should price. I don't know if you guys remember this or not, but then I forget the guy who's essentially supposed to be the bigwig. He comes to market with something that's an equal variant of that, and then that determines the price while they were sitting there trying to determine the price. So it's funny because it's like the Spider-Man meme. It's pointing at you. You're pointing at me. We saying the same thing. We're identical, kind of. But did you say it first? Like, that's what it feels like. And I definitely feel like there's so much I hate. It's like a buzzword, bingo. Like everyone just slings it around and they use words interchangeably when sometimes they can't be interchangeable. And so they look at each other and they start to mirror each other. And that's when I think you get in like that weird, like echo chamber of la, 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 ABM. And then when it comes to the actual execution of this, and we're totally, I'm sure, going to get into this, that's where shit falls apart. Pardon me. Oops. You want to bleep?
we can swear on here. I hope.
It
Not in this
okay?
one.
Great.
No, not in mine. Yeah.
I was just like, feel free to.
Explicit warning.
The only thing I might be,
that's the
only thing I might cut out is nudity. So like, let's just not do that.
All right, Blake, hold on. Like, what
I got to be careful.
kind of party is this?
Chris,
yeah.
were you gonna say something? No, I thought you were chomping at the bit there. Yeah, no
I was going to
Alex,
say something on that as well. I think it's like ABM just, I think, seems like a much bigger piece of homework for a marketing department to take on than I think it actually is. Like, I mean, I've worked in a bunch of different startups now, and I think I've never really worked in anywhere that's really defined its, persona or personas of who the customer is. It's kind of like we have our hunch and we go for it.
Yep.
And I think that sort of like sophistication of like really defining like your ideal personas across with data in particular is like that, like next level. There's like that 0 to 1 and that 1 to 10. It's like that 0 to 1 part is just like that leap for an org. It's just that bit of sophistication, because I think it's like conceptually it makes sense for people. Like we're saying, I mean, like we all know it's like, yeah, though, like, I mean, shouldn't we obviously target people like and target the right accounts with data? I mean, it makes sense. And then you're like, why is nobody able to define it? Why is nobody actually really like, why is it really hard to even like turn it into a process internally? And I think it's like just marketing teams, I think, you know, you do need that kind of level of like sophisticated like knowledge to even like begin to like create the framework to allow it to happen. That sounded so buzzwordy, but you know what I mean? And I feel like,
but there was actually nuggets in there. That wasn't just total horseshit. That actually had foundational elements of truth to it. Like, I think it's.
And I say that from my own experience.
But to your point, I think a lot of people are afraid to get in front of the damn bus. Because guess what? No. If that first pilot isn't just phenomenally successful, it's your face. So
we talk about all the.
I think about it top down. Like, I know we're about to like spit at each other, like bang, bang. But I think that top down buy-in is important, because there has to be like, look, you're just not going to innovate if there's not some failures. Get ready for it, because alignment takes work. Like aligning those two usually chasm separated parts of an org is a paradigm shift. And that's why I make that quote about Big Sur all the damn time, is you cannot just plant, it's an ABM seed. And then we come in the next day and it's like Big Sur. That's not how it works. You don't just go bang, or everyone would be doing it, right? So you see kind of like the cheap dollar store versions of ABM, where we have like one target list, or like, I know 3 titles and I'm calling that personas. But that's not true, right? So like title. So I think
there's so much that could go wrong, right? Yeah. There's so much that can go wrong in the execution. And, you know, the tools that we have sometimes aren't there. You know, there isn't one ABM platform that fits all, that works with all organizations, right? And so Jason, you selecting out, saying, hey, look, like, do we even fit in this category? Or are we going to start a new category of what the best B2B way to attack, you know, targeting accounts and going after them? You know, what's that look like, right? There's all these different components: direct mail, digital ad warm-ups, SDR outreach components, you know, marketing, email communications, nurtures, all these different things, right?
Yeah, I don't think it's a sorry, I'm interrupting you. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I don't think that it's a lack of technology for why this isn't working. I think there's plenty of tools. I think that companies use tools as a crutch to not have a good strategy.
Yes, louder for the people. Louder for the people in the back, because the tech doesn't solve it, the people do. Thank you.
Poor selection of a list, lack of understanding of actual customers, lack of being able to articulate your value prop, lack of an ability to deliver a message in a way that it gets consumed, lack of long-term thinking. Those are the reasons that it fails.
Yeah. And sometimes the org can't even answer the question for themselves. And that's a come to Jesus moment, you guys. Where you're like, well, what's our goal? And you kind of get like blank stares, or you're like, who would you say for like the next year, like where we're going to be, you know, growing our product or growing our audience at? What does that look like? And they're just like,
So Chris,
yeah, but I think my point on the technology was more about, you know, we have the tech, but a lot of the talent inside the organization doesn't know what's possible with the tech, or how to use the tech in coordination with all of the other programs, right? We have CRM.
Oh, amazing.
We have the ability to execute campaigns across multiple different ad platforms. Each one has its own different use cases to be able to go to market with it. You know, and that's why, you know, exists for metadata, right? To be able to, you know, coordinate those efforts. So not necessarily the technology can't solve it, but internally we need to know what the game plan is and how to use that technology in our favor.
Yeah, and I think so.
Yeah, I actually,
hold on one sec, Alex. I got a question for Chris. So Chris, you have a lot of clients that are in this like decision space, or they're already doing a lot of one thing and not a lot of another. Like, if you look at some of your clients, do you think are when they came to you, were most of them already doing a flavor of both? Did they understand it? Like, what was your, you know, if you were trying to like summarize some of the clients that you've worked with, you know, over the last couple of years and where they started and kind of how they came in, how would you characterize that?
Yeah, this answer will come back to definitions. And I don't think this just needs to include my customers. I talk to hundreds of enterprise SaaS companies every month. So I think that a lot of companies are pretending that they're doing ABM and they're actually just doing poor demand gen with outbound sales put together.
Yeah.
That exists.
Ding, ding, ding. We have a winner. There it is, baby. Tech
And
doesn't solve it.
so that's what I'm seeing in a lot of ABM executions, which is why, like, when I think about the process of an organization of you're running shitty lead gen right now and you want to move into ABM, I think that there are steps that you need to take. I don't think that you just rip it apart and be like, okay, we're going to go to ABM now. So our marketers don't know how to create demand because all they've been doing is running performance marketing lead gen that doesn't close. And all of a sudden we're going to buy a new tech tool. We can't do marketing. We don't know how to execute campaigns effectively, but now we're going to do this so that our sales team can target these accounts and marketing will do some fluffy stuff at the top, like display account warmups or something, while our sales team does cold calls and then take call credit on influenced revenue for any account that comes through. And so so I think that there are steps to take. And I think step one for companies is to actually execute demand gen properly. Redefine what a lead is that includes intent and firmographic fit, drive that through a funnel, understand how to create content that resonates with buyers, understand your customers effectively. And I recommend doing it in a one-to-many model so that you get some scale, so you can actually get some things done and you can learn. The next thing that I think companies should do is have a well-executed, what I would call brand marketing strategy. And so that would include a podcast, organic social that people love, an event strategy that people come back to every week or every month, perhaps a community, those types of things. And then when you have all of those pieces in place, I believe that you are organizationally ready to start considering ABM.
Nice. Well, and here's, I've seen this happen a couple times. I've been a part of this thing, and this happens too often. And I'll call it the bloated sales team. And so you're marketing, but you're in an org that has a humongous sales team. And what happens in those orgs is, because the big sales team need activities to do, they've kind of been conditioned on this like volume of leads thing. And then they have to do a lot of activities to convert those. In these large orgs where you have a bloated sales team that's doing what I call most of the marketing, like they're actually doing most of the marketing. You're basically just tossing them over an email address and you're saying, please sell the product for me. Like not do all my job for me, but kind of sometimes. And the problem with that is it makes it really hard for an org to switch to quality over quantity, because they have, hey, I got to keep my sales team busy. What am I going to do? Just go lay off a bunch of salespeople because you say you're going to give me higher quality and lower quantity. And so that's why it makes it so hard. You've got this like push and pull with sales leadership where it's like, yep, no, we hate your leads. Okay, great. Let me give you fewer of them, but much better. No, give me the same amount, but better, and then you're just left as a marketer. Like, I don't even know. So this is what we did.
Unrealistic.
All we did, and this is one specific example, I won't name the company. We just fucking lowered the MQL score to give them more volume.
That's what every company does.
Is that what they do? Okay.
That's
the strategy. Like, score. That's the strategy. That was the strategy. Like, well, let's just think about this. If they come visit twice, maybe it's 3 times. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't know what that means.
When they hit the job page,
5 points if they visit the career page.
Yeah.
But I'd like to touch back on what Chris said around proper demand gen, and I like to think about it starting at the bottom of the funnel first, and really owning that. And that's the communication between sales and marketing. What percentage are we getting of opportunities that are closed won, and move your way up the funnel to be able to make sure that you're tracking at the right level and that you're actually doing proper campaigns and orchestration of those campaigns. So I thought that was a great, first step of what to do.
So we've talked a lot about sales and marketing alignment. I've heard it a lot kind of going through this. And so I feel like that's probably one of the things that you need to have pretty solid, or a good kind of mature sales and marketing relationship to make this stuff work well. Let's talk about that a little bit. So Alex, either talk about your current, kind of currently what you're doing or what you've seen in the past, but, an area, or why is that alignment so important, between sales and marketing for these types of programs to work. And it's not ABM or demand gen, it really is either one. I don't think you can really make anything work very well. Sorry, I don't want to try and lead the witness, but like, what are your thoughts around that? Why is that
Open-ended
important?
question. No, it's funny. I think you're dead right. I mean, like, you know, especially having come into B2B now as well myself, and before, like, obviously working with a school where we're trying to define what kind of a student, for example, should come in. I mean, like, I'm working I look at those as sort of the sales org in that context. To now, like, I'm taking my lead for everything from sales. Like, I look at marketing as a support function for other departments. I mean, I don't have a quota, like I don't have a commission that I'm working against like the sales org does. So like they need me to supply them with the best qualities that they can possibly get. I think like for me as well, like I'm just here to like try and provide for them. So I listen to like understand like who are the customers, who are the high value accounts that they're trying to like go after, like, and try to turn that into some semblance of a marketing strategy. Like I try to break down things into like always on and into like campaign level stuff. So like, for example, like if like, you know, sales say we got these leads, and I'm like we were laughing there, you get a list, like, yeah, I'm like, so what? Like what are we gonna do? Like, what's the plan for this? And really putting a lot of pressure and onus on them to really come up with a lot of like the sort of go to market for that, to really co-create it with me. I cannot operate in a silo. I don't think it would be successful as an org for us to even grow as a business if I was here running marketing in a sort of like island by myself. And to be fair, like I think, you know, like I've never had much pushback or difficulty in any job I've had working with different sales departments. I hear horror stories and I read horror stories all the time, and I'm always curious about what those must be like, because I've been lucky that I've been like very kind of blessed with the types of salespeople that I worked with, that but maybe I do a good job and they're just happy with me. I don't know.
There you go. I'm sure that's part of it. Yeah,
Imagine that's the case. Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
Like, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it comes down to leadership. I think it's a big portion of it, right? Luckily, we're blessed here at SupportLogic to have two really strong leaders. Our CRO and our CMO are very much aligned. We have joint calls weekly on sales and marketing. And I feel that my role in the organization is to have sales as my customer, making sure that we are aligned and our ideas are equally on the drawing board to be able to, you know, go to market together. So I think a big portion is making sure that the leadership is aligned and making sure that from the top down, we're all, you know, all in on it.
Brandee, thoughts?
I was going to say this actually ties into, there's not much that you already haven't said, but like collectively, if you're thinking about it, just when we use the word alignment so conceptually, and it's so easy for us to say, but if you've ever sat in a traditional org where there's a chasm, it's a hell of a lot of work, because you have to reach, traditionally it's marketers reaching across the aisle because we bring the cookies and we set up the meetings and we drag them in there in their alpha state and try to explain to them, we're not just here to throw you shit leads that you get to dig through and like never get to spiff, right? So I think that alignment is huge, reoccurring, actionable meetings that aren't just like us like puking out what we're doing that week.
Here's what we did for you.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, yeah, like I think that, and
Be
then,
grateful.
and then tying our bodies to their rev goals. Like it's important that we share common goals. That alignment, that maturity, it won't exist until we're tied to that goal. And for marketing, to our point, it's actually, into Alex's point, I think too, it's a new thing. Like we used to just be like, hey, our KPI is really just going to be number of leads generated. Like that's it. And then in truly ABM focused, I think that it's a little bit different there because we're talking about conversions and stuff like that. And that's huge.
Yeah, you need to be aligned at pipeline, that level, right?
So Chris, how many marketers are carrying revenue goals these days versus lead or MQL goals, like in your opinion?
I'm not sure. For us, we're 100%. So 32 out of 32 companies were qualified pipeline accountable for the first 6 months or whatever, if they're longer sales cycles, a little bit longer. And then once our pipeline tips over, we're accountable to revenue at a contribution level. So in that quarter, what percentage of revenue was contributed through marketing sourced activities? I'm talking marketing source too, not marketing influence. So it makes it a little bit harder for some of the people that use influence that might be listening to this podcast. So that's what we're all on. Sourced. Influenced is nice. It's a nice to have. It's good to know, mainly to understand our impact on outbound. And so but I'm looking to put, depending on the company, but pure like normal enterprise SaaS company, I'm looking to put 40 to 60% of revenue in the door every quarter from marketing.
Yeah.
And then you get 20 from partner, and sales has got to go find the other 20 or 30%.
There's not one opportunity that happens that's not marketing influence. That's my opinion. Because like, when did you close a deal or have an opportunity where they didn't go to your website? They never went to your website.
Yeah.
You know, well, that's marketing. And so influence is hard. Like you said, it's nice to have, it's nice to understand, because then you can start to like, just get a little bit of understanding of like different types of campaigns, different assets, different offers, and how those play in. Because I do think that there's something, you know, there's still, you still want to do some pipeline acceleration work, you know, and those kinds of things, I think, which is always influence. But I don't know. We're just kind of dabbling in that right now, because I'm so focused on acquisition. I'm like, man, don't make me spend money trying to accelerate the pipeline. But okay, I think there's some things I can do, so let's give it a try.
Velocity.
But yeah, I think you did raise a good point though. You know, the understanding like the contribution level. I think that's an enormous challenge that like anyone running any sort of acquisition marketing is really like faltering in. Like, and when I say faltering, I mean that in the politest way possible. I think it's actually very difficult to get a head around like decent attribution for any marketing effort whatsoever. And I'm always curious about like, say, even in like B2B for us, I mean, you run an event, like you go to SaaStr or you do something like an IRL. Like, I mean, it's like, I don't think there's enough out there to explain to people how to even figure out how to measure the impact of those kind of events. And how do you figure out like, then what is like sourced or influenced, you know what I mean? Like, I think like, that I think in itself like makes it quite difficult to even justify marketing. And it's like that eternal black box struggle that I think I've definitely kind of come across and hopefully trying to figure out again now. But like, again, it's like you look at and expect, like what I've noticed is all these events for B2B marketing are unbelievably expensive. And in particular for like, you know, like startups, like we're in a Series A right now, and I'm looking at events that are costing 100, 200K to go to for a couple of days, get a booth.
Yeah.
I'm like, you're trying to justify an ROI there. And if most people are trying to go to your website, it's like, exactly. It's like, what? And you're like, you're trying to figure out like how many leads, like I'm there looking at this going, okay, if we send 3 sales guys to this thing, how many like leads are we going to get out of that? And then like, what does that mean after that? Like, I mean, if people come a month after us to our website, how are we justifying? How are we even figuring out how to like kind of attribute that sort of marketing performance, you know?
That was the very first thing I did. That's the very first thing I did coming into SupportLogic. We didn't have adequate metrics around, you know, how we were tracking. I mean, just because we were a new organization, right? So it just wasn't set up yet. But what is the source? How are we leveraging campaigns within Salesforce to be able to track that and to be able to see it within and realize it within what's actually working, right?
How do
and
we
then
account
identifying
for the stuff that doesn't get measured, that can't be measured? Like that's my, you know what I mean? So, and it's my opinion that those are the things that actually make the biggest difference too. So like, I know I've been on a word of mouth kick recently because I did a little test on my website. We had all these leads coming in the website and I couldn't, you know, Google Analytics, I couldn't attribute them to anything. They were all organic or organic search.
Correct.
And so I just emailed all of them. I just emailed them. I was like, hey, marketer to marketer, I'm sure you appreciate what I'm doing here. Can't figure out where you came from. How'd you first hear about us? And I got a lot of replies. They're like, oh, I'm so glad you're doing this.
It's great.
It was like 95% of the replies, it was word of mouth. Either somebody like Chris mentioning us on a podcast or a friend of theirs that runs marketing at a different company, you know, mentioning metadata and that they're working with us. And so, but none of that is attributable. Like if I look at GA and I attribute that, those are all up, and 3 of those became opportunities. And I look at that, I'm like, great, we got it from organic search. And so I would never know that they actually had, you know, either heard something on a podcast or had it recommended to them. So what about that stuff? Like, how do we?
There are a ton of companies out there that have a 20-person SEO team that think it's working, and that's what's actually happening.
So how do we think about that?
A lot of companies, that's what happens across the board. It's content, social, word of mouth.
So if that's the right way to do it though, and let's say you've got a very technical founder or CMO that's like, hey, it's got to be in the data somewhere. How do we account for that? Like, how do we get I don't want to say around it, because it's not really getting around something. It's really just trying to inform or educate. Like, how do we deal with that?
I'm not there yet, but I'd like to be. But one of the things I would think of is social listening, right? Being able to pull some of that metadata in. That's one. I'll tell you though, how I found out about metadata was from one of your customers who I had a good relationship with. And I said, hey, are we there and can we use them? And they're like, absolutely. And so you can mark my lead as, that came from word of mouth.
See, there's another one. Yeah. Are you sure I didn't email you?
No, I was word of mouth before I was in your funnel.
You're on a nurture right now, Blake.
I am
doing, and we have a project open basically because we know all of this stuff exists, and we also know that the way it's being measured right now is not going to pass in a $250 million ARR software boardroom. And so the first step that we took is that we added a "How did you hear about us" on our main conversion form that all of our revenue comes through. And so the main conversion form, "How did you hear about us?" And now we're comparing 3 separate measurements: HubSpot's enterprise attribution, a multi-touch attribution vendor, and then what the person actually said. And it's not that the attribution softwares are wrong. They're measuring different parts of the journey. How did you hear about us is going to give you something more upper funnel that right now is not being measured, and therefore companies are not doing it. And so it gives us all that data. How did you hear about us is word of mouth or our podcast or LinkedIn across the board. And then on the bottom, all we see is organic search or direct traffic or some people that clicked a calendar link out.
That is,
yes.
And so
that is so it.
We're doing that. The next level that we're going to pursue on is win analysis. So a little bit deeper of what like Jason did, but more like qualitative interviews with people. And then the third level is measuring the market on an ongoing basis. So who you feel like the preferred vendor is, show logos, how'd you hear about those logos, and start to understand that in like a mass market. So those are the 3 levels, because at the moment, all of the channels that I believe are making the most impact, they certainly are for our business and for a lot of the companies that we work with, are not getting credited by attribution software. And I think it's really hurting companies because they literally just don't understand it and don't know how to measure it.
Yeah.
Short term versus long term.
Yeah.
You actually raised something. I had an issue before with we're using segment and it's multi-touch to define everyone. It was like, this is great, we're going to get a bit of attribution in here. And you get your UTM set up across all your different campaigns, and you're looking at it, you go, wow, 60% of all of everything is organic. And you're like, okay, now this is opening a Pandora's box, because leadership is going to come to me and say, we should invest all our money in content, obviously. And in marketing, I'm like, do you even understand what's driving all this organic, if that's what we can call it? And it like basically did open a Pandora's box, and it was a very stressful period to even undo the image that type of attribution. So I very much come to believe it's like wonderful directionally. But I think, Chris, to your point, it's like you really have to augment it with as much sort of like, you were talking about your qualitative, you had like your multi-touch, your HubSpot, 100%, and then going deeper into that win analysis. Because I think it's like, otherwise you're just going to take the wrong image from what the data is telling you, because it's only, I believe it's so directional. And I don't think as well, many marketers truly understand time decay, linear, first touch, last touch, multi-touch, all these different, it just tells you what you want to hear. You know what I mean?
Totally.
You can play with it to say, what,
Which one tells the best story?
Which one makes
the best
look
story?
amazing? I've got a QBR deck
Exactly.
due in 5 minutes. How do we look like hot shit?
It's gotten to a point where it's
Exactly.
used to prove to executives the outcomes versus driving strategy.
Yes.
And that's
100%.
really the difference here, is like the point of attribution is to drive strategy. Not
When
to
I was at
justify
Tableau,
expenses.
Tableau had a lot of money, and so I got to play with a lot of money. And we spent $250,000 with a couple of consulting firms building our own multi-touch attribution model, fractional credit attribution model.
God.
I had to remember that we used Markov chain. Like it was like it was like so sophisticated and just so beautiful. And guess what it told us? Nothing.
It's giving me heartburn.
Here's what it told
Give
me.
me
It
heartburn
told me
hearing that.
that Google AdWords should get 3.27% credit for a given deal. And then LinkedIn should get 25.3%. And I'm like, I just spent all that money and I'm
On the deal.
literally no smarter, maybe dumber actually now, maybe dumber because my intuition was probably better than what this like fucking 25.6, you know, like
The machine
percent
has
credit for a
spoken.
deal. Exactly. And so it's like, there's something to be said about the totality of the things that you're doing working. And so my guess is it's like, we're doing things, we're giving it some time to build because none of these things that really work overnight. And then we're looking at just a general lift in inbound market or, you know, from inbound marketing. I mean, is that where we're at?
Yeah, or just engagement, right? And seeing if something resonates and tracking that across everything. I mean, it's hard, right? This is hard stuff, and it just depends on, you know, how you're able to execute it.
And I think to the point of that, this is hard. That comes back to operations too. So like a lot of the times operations are, what's the word I'm looking for? They are considered supplementary or optional in marketing. So like,
Or outsourced.
Hey,
yeah,
what?
or outsourced. What do you mean we need an ops person? Can't you do this on your own? And then so what you end up doing is you're tackling the dinosaur from like 3 different angles, which is conceptual, huge, overlying strategy tied to business rev goals, the grunt work of building everything from UTM to like, what is this container? I've got to do this, I've got to do that, like all the back end administrative, like admin, literal operational work, and then execution, delivery, deploy, and then post, report, data stitching, whether you're using Tableau, Alteryx, it doesn't matter what it is, GA, DS, all of that, like that now lives for the most part in 1 or 2 bodies max. If you are in a small, if you're anywhere between A and D, usually it's 1. They like to try to amalgamate into 1 person. And the issue is that dual hemisphere of like marketing being traditionally a creative idea thinker, we make beautiful things, we engage with human storytelling, is uniquely different than quantitative, statistical, empirical analysis that will spit out information that will be actionable for you to move forward based on empirical evidence. So they're 2 different hemispheres. And so like that's truly like the goal there is to try to find someone who can understand both worlds and operate in them. And I think that's more rare than people give it credit for. And so you find people who are really great at the statistical part, but are shit at coming up with creative campaigns that engage a human, or you find people who are great at creating like beautiful ads and lovely videos and dude, check out my boss edit in Canva. And then it's just like, but did it work? I don't know. And so like living in that dual hemisphere, I think is the new marketer. It's the marketer of the future. And it's an adaptation that is a paradigm shift tied to things like ABM that make it mandatory, because in order to do big shit, you have to learn big shit. And this is a change from many folks who have been seasoned by traditional demand gen.
Yeah, and or knowing what you're good at and making sure that you're hiring, because that's me in a nutshell. So I grew up in the ops world. I'm fairly creative, but like not even close. And I'm not great with words. You know what I mean? Like I'm just long-winded. I just go off and off and off. So I need a copy editor. You know, I can get my ideas down, but I need editing. And so, but I think you're right. I mean, it's definitely, it requires both sides of the brain now more than it ever has. With some intuition in there too. For the people that are data first, like you got to start to trust your gut as well. Let's move into some tactical. Let's move into the tactical part of this. Let's talk about like, okay, what are some things people can do or need to do to get started, I guess. So let's say you're doing traditional spray and pray, inbound, demand gen, whatever you want to call it, marketing. You want to think about, you think you should be doing ABM, you're not sure. Let's talk about that a little bit. So first of all, are there profiles of B2B companies that don't need to do ABM or deep ABM? Chris, I know you have thoughts about that.
Yeah, I think if you sell, if you don't have deals that are somewhere between 100 and 250K or above, you have no business doing real ABM. That's my feeling. If you're going to do one-to-many like marketing out of an ABM platform, then be my guest. You can do that at 30K deals. It's probably not going to be very effective, but I think if you're like really going to put the effort in and execute at a personalized level, it's probably closer to 250K now to support the CAC.
And that's because that true
100%.
ABM effort requires so much more activity, experience, length of time.
Yeah, you're
thinking,
going. Let's say you're
strategy.
going to go after 50 accounts that year. You might win one of them. And how many people are you going to put in that project? 6,
Yeah.
10?
Yeah, if it's one-to-one, for sure. I mean, you need a really high ARR to support that effort. One-to-many, I mean, you can get a little bit easier, but of course the personalization of the programs goes down.
Yeah, it's just weird because I think one to many is demand gen. I think it's just good demand gen. I would even argue that one to few, if you like industry segment or segment by mid-market versus enterprise, I would say that's demand gen too. So
That's
it's
probably
weird.
why everyone has a different definition
It's
of
really
ABM.
interested in definitions. I acknowledge that my definition is not common.
Are any of you guys in that kind of place right now where you're just trying to figure out like how far into ABM we go based on what we're selling, or Blake?
Oh yeah, like we're testing it, piloting it out right now, right? And what
How do you
that looks
test
like.
it? How do you test an ABM program these days?
So right now, I mean, you think about it, testing the data first, right? Because a big effort around ABM is really looking in and scrubbing and really getting personal with that data. What's the technographics? You know, what plays are we going to do with them, right? To be able to go there. So testing the data. I'm testing on the front end when we get the data from some of our providers, being able to see, you know, who's at the same company. I mean, that's a big one, right? Or what email addresses bounce, or what potential ones are in spam traps, right? The quality of your data, right?
Yeah.
And then testing the messaging and alignment. We talked about this early on the call, right? You can have a wonderful program. If it doesn't relate to someone, it's waste. It's waste on our end, but it's waste on the customer's end, right? They're seeing something that isn't there. And then at the back end is testing the results of it, right? How much, whether, you know, which part of the funnel in, is it, you know, high level? Is it the engagement? Are you seeing interaction? If it's digital ads, or are you seeing deals come in because of this? Is this influencing? So that's how
I
I
just said
say
something about the data, because I think that's where I've been focusing lately. Is so I started with a list of every company in the US and Canada that's B2B. I started with Zoom Info. That's like, and I probably have some other filters on there, like 27,000 companies. And obviously that 27,000 companies is too big for a target account list, especially for a 55-person company.
One-to-one.
Really
And so
personalized.
we need other ways of like
Personalized.
sorting and filtering that down. And so we have all the traditional data, like technographic, intent data, blah, 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 firmographic data we can segment. But what I've found is if you can find a unique piece of signal or intent data for yourself, that is so much more powerful. So because we sell a solution that helps people with advertising, they have to be spending money on advertising to be a good client for us. So I actually built my own signal where I go out to LinkedIn and Facebook and I count the number of ads that they have on those platforms currently. And then I just bake that into my data source. And now I've got a source that says, oh, I've got all these people, these are B2B companies that have no ads on LinkedIn or Facebook. That's not worth it for me right now. I don't want to try and convince them right now. That's the long game for me. Convince them why they should be on those platforms, but that's not going to help me right now. So that's like where my content needs to play. My content needs to start to convert those people into like, well, why should I be spending B2B money on Facebook or LinkedIn for that matter? But the people that I have those signals for, they have a more immediate need for the platform, especially if they're like high on LinkedIn, low on Facebook. I can tell you why. You know, B2B targeting on Facebook is really not great. And so those signals, if you've got a specific part of your ICP that's not findable, so find out how can you figure out where to get that data. Now I had to pay people outside of the United States to write these programs to find this, but it works. You know what I mean? Like it works, and it you can do it. You know, it's not illegal, but like you can do it. And so, especially if it's not at a personal level, this company level, right?
I was like, this may be edited for quality assurance.
Yeah, I think
They all
we all
know.
have
We all
understanding
do
of
it.
cookie.
We all do it.
They all know, yeah. They're always trying to, every time I run it, I have to change it a little bit because the algorithm gets a little bit more sophisticated. But anyway, regardless.
And you're
so-
spot on. That signal identification for us, it's people with complex support, right?
How do you
It's a
find that
B2B
out?
support.
How do you,
So
is there a
it's-
signal somewhere where you can figure that out?
It's some of it's word of mouth, some of
Yeah.
it's looking at the ticketing system, some of it is, you know, attributing to those ticketing, right? It's like, what problems would you have with the ticketing system? Those types of things, right? It's weeding those out. But again, it's really hard. And it's a mixture of scraping, it's social listening, it's all of the above.
So you've got your list.
I have a
now.
question, actually.
Yeah, Alex. Yeah.
I was going to ask you, just like on this topic of this list, because I presume somebody listening out here is going, we just mentioned this is our ABM list. So we're talking about a small amount of clients here as well. Because like Mike or Chris, sorry, rather, you were saying, Chris, you were saying that like, you know, just further up this bit back, I've got a note here when you're like, you're to go after about 50, you're mentioning like, you're like 50 clients in like a year or something. One of you mentioned 50 clients in a year.
Yeah, I mean,
and I'm like,
the number
so
can
I'm thinking
vary,
about
but
this.
there's a max that you could do one-to-one on. Yeah.
Exactly. So when I think about this, it's like you guys are taking this like max number of clients, whatever that number may be for this ABM initiative, and then going into your data, looking at it and going, what's our unique sort of like segment within this data that we have of intent, and then say, okay, now we're going to quasi manually figure out how to like get more data into this to like refine it even more. Is that what you guys are kind of saying on a sort of like technical level, if I'm understanding this correctly as well?
I mean, I'm just trying to find as much relevant data as I can that's going to get me closer to companies that are ready to buy. You know what I mean? And so that's really the way I think about it, is like the traditional data we all have access to. If we all have Zoom Info or whatever Crunchbase subscriptions, guess what? Everyone else has access to that same data. So you're basically going after the same types of people with the same types of queries and filters as everybody else. And so that's why I think finding a unique signal for yourself is incredibly important. And like a great place for signals is job boards. You know what I mean? Like you can find people to write
100%.
scripts. You know what I mean? They'll go through job boards, look at companies, what they're hiring for, the skills they're hiring for. There's a lot of interesting things that you can still do on your own that other companies haven't necessarily created a product for that intent data, for example. And so really thinking about like, what's that one factor that really makes the customer a good customer for us, and where can we find that data or a proxy for it, you know?
Yeah, no, that's you're spot on with the job boards, because that's something we look at. If someone calls someone in their function a certain title, that shows that they have a complex support organization, right? So it's, but it's taking that, and that's the manual process of going through that. And what's that?
It's just like Minesweeper. Do you guys remember Minesweeper, the game? Did I just date the shit out of myself? Anyway, Google search it. It's Minesweeper, right? Because the solution's in the middle and you're like, oh, I'm seeing signs that it might be there, but I don't want to quite hit the nerve until I'm sure. And it feels that way. There are indicators around the main thing, but you can't quite see what it is. But you get enough
creativity behind it. Yeah. Like finding where you can get that data, because it sometimes doesn't exist in a traditional data set.
Yeah.
Right. Cool. What are some other things that people should be doing? So how do you decide? One of the points that came up was, you know, how do you pilot this? How do you pilot it without technology? You know, so like there's a question of, do you need an ABM platform to pilot an ABM strategy? I would say no, but I'm biased. So who else has a better answer than me?
I don't know. I'm going to agree with you there, because they're not going to be willing to spend money until there's something that can show, can you do this without blowing $100,000? Because we're Series A, and that means I'm going to fire you and just hire an agency to use that same platform. So no, like, I think the pilot, and there's so many things that you guys can find online for this. If you're listening for the first time and you want to hear about like pilots, there's a great, I can't remember what it was, but it was like a pilot to pipeline episode we did on ABM. And it's being able to say, okay, like let's test target accounts. Let's make sure that we reach across the aisle with sales, you identify at minimum, please, the target accounts that you want to see, potential personas like identified companies, titles, positions, the business priorities, you know, and the pain points for sales, like understanding like what are they hearing, literally what are they hearing on calls? What's the alma mater for the people that are on this list, so that we can, you know, target them effectively. And I think after that, you can look at like the metric in comparison and then insight gained. So you can look at number of sites visits before that campaign launch, and it'll tell you whether or not that ad or that targeted effort gained awareness, right? Or number of sites from your target account versus a non-targeted control group. Like, do you see like, did the target account you visit more? Are they more aware of your brand? Did it land better? So I think that being able to do a pilot like that can be, it's marketing's lift to be sure on the operations side, because you're going to be reaching across the aisle with sales to define those things and to create the structure and processes, which that's where that grunt work comes in, baby. That's that hard midnight oil that you're going to need, because it's not simple to make that first leap. But if you test that pilot on a low to no spend, and you see any indication like, hey, you know, the targeted group visited 4x more, or we saw XYZ percentage of increase in conversions from the target group versus control, then there's like, again, a bit of the minesweeper. There's an inference that would say, maybe we could test it again. And then you dip a little bit more into the pot, maybe invest some money in it, expand, it's land and expand. And then at that point, if you have 2 or 3 mini pilots that were effective, first off, sales is going to be like, yeah, man, we're in, like Flynn, like, what, you want me to get in the next meeting and I'll talk about it and evangelize the shit out of it to the CTO. And so you have that partnership where it's like, boom, it's successful. And so then you can get buy-in to go for the more enterprise level, elegant solutions that are ABM centric. But before you know who you're talking to and what you're going to be doing and how big is that need even going to be based upon the size and the, you know, restraints of your company, doing it without buying in on another damn piece of tech is, I think, paramount, because whether or not you get that collaboration that you need in order to be successful in the beginning is going to be indicative of that tech won't solve it, right? The people.
Well, I think it also shows your mettle as a marketer. I hate the word metal, but like whatever,
Yeah.
it makes sense right there. You know, like, do you need supporting technology to get your job done, or can you show us that you can do an MVP and like get us some good data to make a decision, and then we can maybe go ahead and invest in a platform.
Yeah, what I'm thinking is,
go ahead, Chris.
It's like, you shouldn't need a pilot. I feel like marketers at the point, especially with the investment level, you should be able to earn the ability to just move forward by executing and driving results before you get there, right? So I think I kind of mentioned it before, it feels like it's a Band-Aid for marketing that's not working. And I would much rather have companies figure out how to do marketing that works and then add ABM as another layer. I just think it's more effective. And so like, we have no difficult conversations with companies trying to invest in a ABM tool for $100,000 because we just put $1 million ARR in the door last quarter. So it's not a difficult conversation when demand one-to-many, one-to-few is already working.
Yeah. I think that the funny part of all of that is it's the assumption of a non-dysfunctional organization. And that in itself will be paramount to the success of anything that marketing is doing. So sometimes when you have the Band-Aid of a pilot, it allows you to open that door for, air quotes, paradigm shifting, right? To say we are going to change organizationally in the way that we view our business, as opposed to, you know, hey, we fixed it internally, we corrected ourselves. Because sometimes to get people to reach across the aisle, you have to say, oh, we're going to change this like fundamentally for the whole org. And ABM, the idea of ABM pilot, particularly to C-suite who heard it from their bro on Crunchbase or their dude on Twitter, and they're like, yo, that's sexy, like data and AI, and I need to do ABM now. Like, that's going to get the buy-in for them to go, hey, VPs, like, go get your shit done and help them do this pilot. I want to see if this shit works because we can make more money. So sometimes it is a necessary evil, because it's like a little bit of a tap on the head of the dog with the newspaper to say, don't do that. We can do it better like this. And then that healthy union, that pilot becomes a test for efficacy for the org. And then you can come up behind them and start enabling them with the things that should have been there all along. But sometimes they're stuck in their ways and hey, it's always worked this way. I don't want to do ABM. That's bullshit.
Yeah, that's the maturity, right? Just one other thing for us in terms of piloting, because we aren't leveraging a full ABM platform right now because we want to build it. So build it, test it, then scale it. And the reason why we did it that way is so that when we do scale it, we know the problems and the bottlenecks of how we need to accomplish this and go like on a scaled approach. And you won't learn that by just adopting a software and just saying, oh, does it do this? Does it do that? Does it do this? Oh, wait, it doesn't do this. Why did we just spend this amount of money on this tool when we're just getting glorified reporting that we could have got out of Excel, right? And
I'll just say this: if you're using an ABM platform and that's your ABM strategy, you're wrong. I'm just gonna you're just wrong, unfortunately, right? Like if your ABM is just living within an ABM platform, it's just wrong, because none of the ABM platforms out there today give you everything you need to run a effective, true ABM program.
Yeah, there's no silver bullet. And I think that's the magical realization. That's the come to Jesus moment that sometimes to the points that were raised earlier, those pilots or test sessions show, which is there is no silver bullet. This is going to be months and months of grinding hard ass work. And there's going to be a shit ton of paradigm shifting on who are we? What do we sell to? Who are our title targets? What are our personas? All of that stuff takes time. And sometimes in order to move that needle and to get people's asses on board with change, which change is hard and no one wants to do it less than these particular parts of the org, it's a necessary evil. It's a piece of candy to get the kid potty trained. And then eventually
I actually think,
no, go ahead.
Sorry for interrupting. I was gonna say, like, there's two things really, I think, in this context for piloting. I think number one, it's like the cost. Like, it doesn't matter what org you're in, if you're Series A, Series C, if you walk up to your head of finance and go, I want 100 grand for this tool, he's gonna look at you with like 10 heads and go, come on now, mate. Like, what's the proposal? Like, and you really have to invest so much time to get it to a point where you go, this is the resource I need. This is like the outcomes that I think we can achieve. And it's like a lot to get to that point. So even like getting to the point where you get a buy-in for a tool like that, that could be any number of like days, weeks, whichever. And then also I think with a lot of these softwares, they're so not plug and play that you have the whole heartburn of actually launching them. You know, like any larger tool like a Marketo, they're going to give you like an onboarding specialist or whatever. And before you know it, you're 3 months in and you haven't even launched an email. You know what I mean? And I think that in itself is just like, and I'm not hating on Marketo. But
I know, I love that.
And I'm not, but all these companies
Resources.
like do that. I'm like, just get me over the line tomorrow, mate. Like all I want to do is like get this, but if I'm going to pay for this, I want it live like tomorrow. Like I don't need all this in the background. And I think there's so much of that that really derails a lot of the appetite for like, or kills that sort of momentum and that excitement of getting that kind of like, oh my God, I can't believe I got this signed off. Now I've got to go do this. And so that's why I think like the point about the piloting, I think it's interesting, the pilot to pipeline strategy. I just documented it for myself there, Brandee. And I'm like, oh, it's great. I'm totally going to steal this idea
There
now.
it is, baby. Go Google it.
But that's great. I think that but that's a good cultural norm to have in an organization, I think as well, like being able to say, okay, like how are we going to pilot something? How are we going to test something? How are we going to turn this around tomorrow? Because in particular with these sort of CRM tools that like have all your like company data, they just are like turning around a tanker in terms of like timing to kind of get them stood up and built in a way that like, you want to test a value prop on Google search? Yeah, I'll turn that on in 5 minutes. Do you know what I mean? Like you can do that. You can't,
we fixed
you know?
Yeah. Honestly,
exactly.
I think so, and this will be, I think, the last metaphor, because I know we're coming up on time. So get ready for my final metaphor. So like my original background, by the way, in case you haven't picked up on this shit, was theater. So I studied musical theater, opera, ballet, triple threat, bang, 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 5, 6, 7, 8 for like 20 plus years. And it's amazing how much that actually translates to tech. And so I think it's interesting because when I look at ABM, I think of like a beautiful fucking waltz. Like in the Beauty and the Beast finale, or like a well-executed Pride and Prejudice, go watch it. It's brilliant. He walks through the moors. It's gorgeous. But like those moments that are finally executed that are gorgeous, guess what? They all started with learning the first 3 steps. So like when we think about going from like, I just learned what a plie is and how to partner with a person to try to dance for 2 minutes and turning that into the execution of a waltz, like there's an anticipatory learning curve there that cannot be sped through, or you'll be tripping over your own damn feet in 6 months and we'll go, oh my God, it failed. We knew it would fail and we just blew all that money. So like you have to like build in those expectations of this will take time. Good things that grow require discipline, and that discipline won't come overnight. Neither will the operational excellence. So it's going to take time to get to that ballroom scene, baby. It doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah, that's a great metaphor. And I think, we are running up on time. So I'm gonna turn us to our last topic, which is we're gonna each go through and give like one tip related to this like discussion we've had around ABM versus demand gen, just to help folks that are maybe just getting started or struggling a bit, maybe with a little bit of advice. So I'll go last. Does anyone want to go first? Because I just surprised you with it. Brandee, sounds like you're good.
I'm gonna go first. So you should bulk buy Tums. That's my first piece of advice, is you should bulk buy them because they're way cheaper to buy in bulk. But no, I think the first part is start to understand, look at your organization literally through the goal goggles of the people you are going to have to be in love with to make it work, which is for traditional marketers, like most marketers, like I came from sales by owning my own e-com, but like they don't have a spiff hanging over their head, or like their work isn't commission based. So the sense of urgency and dire need to hit this fucking sales goal, it's not there. We're just kind of like, traditional marketers, it's not there. So put your goggles on and actually
Maybe
sit
we
down
should
with
have
someone
commission.
like,
Maybe
yeah,
we should be
well,
on
hey,
commission.
don't even get me started on that, because I don't want to hate me on LinkedIn, okay? It's already been a rough 2020. So all I'm saying is, like, you have to be able to literally put yourself into the shoes of the other people that you're going to work with and understand what's important to them. What are their goals? And like actionably, how are you tied to them? As a service center model, for sure, to Blake's point earlier, but then also as a partner in revenue and in operations. And I think that's huge. That's the first thing, is learn to see world through sales eyes, learn to see the world that you're looking through C-suite, who you're about to ask for money from. Think about what's important to them and what questions they're going to have, and anticipatorily train yourself to have those answers in your pocket so they have confidence in your decision-making and understand your mindset.
Cool. Thanks for that, Brandee. Alex, you go next. Tip for the listeners.
Don't get bogged down in the technical deliverability of this. Just get out there and send an email and figure it out from there.
I like it. Blake, what's your tip?
I'm going to go unconventional. I'm just going to say, have an honest idea of where you are in this. And, we talked about, are you good at demand gen? Are you good at other things? Knowing your strengths, knowing your weaknesses, but also knowing what you don't, like trying to find out what you don't know around ABM. And perhaps you're doing some of these things and people are calling it ABM, but it's not.
Cognitive dissonance in marketing is rampant. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Chris, what's your...
Geez, I wish I would have said that.
Chris, what's your tip?
That was
So a lot of marketers and a lot of marketing leaders come to me and say something along the lines of, hey, Chris, we're all bought into ABM. We're going to go out and do it. And so I asked them, you got your list? And they're like, we got the list. And I say, have you ever met one person that works at any of these companies? And everyone says no. And I say, get out of the fucking boardroom and go talk to 3 people at each of these companies and see if you even have a shot of fucking winning here. Because most people just pick a list from random or let their sales team pick it. And marketers need to have an understanding of those people inside of those accounts to craft messaging, but also to even know whether the program's going to work or not. I've been at plenty of companies where sales targets accounts, and I know that we're going to lose at those accounts because I've already talked to all the people in them. And so that's what I would recommend.
I like it. My tip is going to be, when you get into one of these programs, you've got to give it the right amount of time and you got to be patient. And Brandee, you already mentioned this, but I'll just reiterate it since it wasn't your tip, but give it time. So like I've been part of orgs where you get into it, like everyone agrees, yes, let's do it. And then you don't set stepped kind of places to measure the progress, or you don't do it right. And then you get 6 months in, 9 months in, the CMO's like, well, it's not happening. And you're like, well, just give it some time. And they're like, can't do it anymore. And so I like to think about not only the success metrics, but what are your failure metrics too? Like, can you set up things where you say to yourself, okay, if we've done these things and we've gotten this far and it's still not working, then we pull the cord. Because I've seen a lot of companies just keep doing it and then end up wasting a lot of money when they probably should just flip back to kind of more traditional demand gen.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. All right. Well, hey, everybody, thanks for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed it, come to our website and subscribe. We'll give you an update when future episodes come out. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks a lot. I really, really, really appreciate it.
That was funny.
Yeah, everybody was great. Yeah, this was a good group. It's hard to win 5 people, but it actually wasn't too bad. So next steps on this, I'm going to go through, I'll do some like storyboarding of it, send it to our editor, get it done. If any of you want, I'll send you guys all the raw recording. If any of you want me to create clips for yourself, you know what I mean? Have my editor create clips for you. I can do that as well.
Are you sure you
I like to do that. Yeah, no, I like to do that too. You know what I mean? If you're going to come on, why do you have to do your own editing of like your own clips? And so, yeah, absolutely. It comes with the territory. So, but I'll let you guys know when that first edit's ready. But I'll send you the full episode so you can decide like which ones you want, and then just send me the timings, of the clips that you like, and we'll get it together. But yeah, it was great. Really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Cool.
Yeah, thank you. Good to meet you.
Thanks. It was fantastic.
Thank
It
you,
was very nice
guys.
to meet everyone here.
Bye. Nice meeting you.